Okay, we're on. Oh, awesome. This has happened before. Once I drove all the way to Menards from Orion. It's only about 20 minutes, but then I got there. I was going only to buy, go to Menards to browse. I know some people do. My husband. But I got there and I'm like, oh, get my purse and go in and buy the thing. I don't have a purse. My trip to Menards took 2 hours because I had to go home. Okay, I'm sorry. These are the pains of adults that you just really don't care about. Okay, because you also have to go back and forth. So, no, we keep our keys. We keep our keys on a hanging thing because we don't always, my husband and I don't always drive the same vehicle. Like I get the car on the days I go to town and he drives the truck, but then he drives the car. Anyway, sorry, this does not matter at all. Let's talk about who and whom. Do you mind if I read your sentence? Okay, so I will try to read your sentence. Okay, in ancient Greece, there were the Furies whom would decide people's and God's destinies. Okay, here's the deal with who and whom. Yes, so if you know your relative pronoun, qui, quo, quod, you are quite familiar with this concept. This is where Latin, I had a Latin student once, and she just never could get this, and then we did it in her Latin. She's like, now I get it. So here's what she said. In ancient Greece, I'm going to paraphrase your sentence. There were Furies, she put whom, decided fates. All right, I'm just going to make it shorter for time. Who decide fates? Okay. I'm tired. Okay. So what we have to do when we use a relative pronoun, we don't need to worry about gender in English like we do in Latin. But what we want to do is we want to look at the clause that the who or the whom is a part of. And we want to see what the who or whom is doing in that clause. Yes, so what case it's in, even though we don't really talk about cases as much in English. So the who or whom decide fates, that's an add-on clause because there were Furies. This is a sentence. Everything else is frosting. It's explanatory. And if we look at this, if we narrow it down, we see we have a verb and we have a direct object. Decide what? Decide fates. And we need a subject. We need a subject. And who is the subject form? Other than if we did, there were fates. The gods could not disobey. Okay, now I'm adding a different relative clause here. This relative clause has a verb, disobey, all right? Disobey, who disobeys? The gods. So the gods is the subject. Gods disobey who? Whom? We need a direct object. Exactly. And whom is, well, it's an indirect object, direct object, object, the preposition. It's all our object things. Whom? That's how we decide. In this case, our clause needs a subject. And our subject form is who. In this case, we need a direct object. The gods could not disobey whom. And so we choose whom. Yes.
Did you ever take a certain class or teach a certain class called the Essentials of English Language EEL?
No.
Oh, that's exactly how we did it. Yeah.
Is it? Oh. But is that how they told you to figure it out?
Yeah.
Like,
word for word.
Yes. So does that make sense? Oh, I need to give you your, do I still have your paper? Yes. So in this case, it needs a who. So who is a subject and whom, but people, we're getting to the point where almost nobody knows how to use it. I mean, adults, you listen to the news or People don't know when to use. Yeah, they think it's just a fancy hoity-toity way of saying who, and it's one of the few holdovers in English that we actually use specific cases. The other one in pronouns. You know, if it's a subject, we say we, and if it's an object, we say us. And unless you're 2 years old, we don't say, you know, us is going to the park, generally. I don't think even 2-year-olds say, will you go with me? Us is kind of a default thing. There was one other thing I wanted to mention, and I wanted to mention this with Odysseus, and now Oedipus has come up. These people, all these Greek people whose name ends in S, making them possessive. All right, what do you do? Because we could do this, or we could do this. And technically, the rule is, in some English books, that if it is singular, you always add apostrophe S, that is the rule. But for some people, this ends up feeling a little awkward. So I did some digging about what is sort of the party line now, because both are acceptable apparently. And this is what I got out of it. If, when you say it, you add an extra syllable, Oedipus's fate, Jesus's death, add the extra S. And if you don't, Achilles, we don't say Achilles's. I wouldn't say Achilles's anger. I'd say Achilles' anger, and I just make a Z if I was reading that. So in that case, Achilles would not have the extra S. It's kind of a nebulous rule, and I don't know that anybody's going to knock you. Like if you were in a college class, I don't know that you're going to get it wrong because you did it one way or the other. But you know, when my kids were growing up, and our grammar book said if it's singular, always use an apostrophe S. But it just comes out being very awkward if it was Achilles, and I don't say Achilles's. Well, I put it there, but I do say Oedipus's. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's totally, I agree with you, Ethan, completely. So, but I have been asked by some students, should I put an S here? And I've noticed you all doing it different ways. And I just thought, is there some sort of rule I can give you? Yeah, well, it'd be like Pirates of the Caribbean. It's more like guidelines, all right? Not really rules. And if you're just at a loss, I'm not sure whether to put an S on or not, just ask yourself how you pronounce it. But I don't think anybody's going to find fault with either way. And I may early on have corrected some of them, but I just stopped. Just whatever you do, I'm good with personally, because you're probably going to see it both ways. But if you are one of those people who like rules, what's the truth? Then apparently this is as close to the truth as we're going to get. So I apologize. I feel like I'm a little discombobulated today. I just am not sleeping, and I don't have my glasses. So please forgive me for silences and moments when I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to say next or find my place in the book when I can't see it properly. And I hope you can be trained in patience today with your teachers. First of all, I brought in, Hannah asked me, what is a water clock? And I brought in my picture of a water clock. It is basically two receptacles, and the top one has a hole, except the hole it would have to be down in the bottom. I guess this must be a hole for hanging it or something. It must be a hole in the bottom. And just like an hourglass runs sand through, and the sand will travel through in a certain amount of time, and we happen to know that time. These are of a size that a certain quantity of water filling it will fall through in a certain amount of time. It's the same concept. This is a water clock from the time of Socrates. It has a date on it. If I could read it, it'd be awesome. Oh, it just says late 5th century. So the early 400s. When we read Socrates', I think I do an apostrophe S for him, apology, his speech in front of the court saying why he thinks he's on trial, he mentions, if I had all the time in the world, you know, I could go into this matter and this matter and this matter, but the water clock prevents me. Because in court, it's like speeches at the Oscars or something. There's a time limit. And when your water clock ran out, you're done. You can't just, the trial is going to go on for the next day and the next day and the next day while you bring up witnesses or whatever. You have this amount of time to defend yourself and you're done. So anyway, you'd asked about water clocks. So this is a picture of a water clock in the Agora Museum in Athens. But our art of the week is, we're reading about Pericles this week, among many other things. Pericles, the leader of Athens during this time. Athens was run by a council and by 9 archons who brought movements to the people, and the people voted. But really, for a while, everybody was just listening to Pericles because they thought he was just awesomely wise, and they trusted him. But Pericles is also the same guy who decided it would be a good idea to move the treasury for the Delian League to Athens and maybe use it for building the Acropolis. Yeah, you just pull really hard. You won't break it. Just pull. I did the same thing as you. I did the same thing. I was terrified. I thought I'm gonna break the door, and I'm gonna get in trouble. They're gonna throw me out and never let me back in. To pay for it. It's an expensive looking door. Oh yes.
Our door on the front of our house during the winter, like ice and snow gets in there, so you have to manhandle that.
Oh yes. Well, you got to manhandle that thing too. So remember that the Persians had destroyed most of the major buildings of Athens when they came through. The Athenians retreated to their boats and saved themselves at the Battle of Salamis, but Athens was lost. And so all of the beautiful buildings and temples that they had on the Acropolis were done. And they had to start from scratch. And so the rationale of Athens is, we saved Greece, we deserve it. We deserve a lion's share of that money that all the allies are giving for defense, because we put ourselves on the line and we lost it all. I will let you decide if you like their argument or not. However that may be, the buildings that we see on the Acropolis today, the ones that are left, were built during this time period. They are Periclean. Pericles was buddy-buddy with an artist named Phidias. And Phidias did the great statue of Athena that used to be in the Parthenon. So I'm going to bring in pictures of some of these buildings and talk about them, the ones that are left. The first building is called the Erectium, and it is this, do you want me to pass it around, or does it take extra time, or do you care? You probably have seen this before. It's a very odd temple. Erectius was a founder of Athens, all right, whose story always escapes me because it's kind of obscure. It involves him springing from the ground. Just trying to remember. Anyway. Here in Athens, and he founded Athens. So if you stand on this side, so if you walk around in this picture and you stand on this side, it looks like a normal temple from this side, but you can kind of see the columns and everything. Then you come around, but on the back side, it's got a little thing sticking out, and then this side, it's got this thing sticking out. Because the Erectium was a temple to multiple gods, and I picture it as having sections and alcoves with sanctuaries devoted to each one. It's got this weird shape. You can see it's in pretty good shape still. You can't go in any of these. They're blocked off. But you can see the frieze, that panel that we talked about at the top of that order of columns. They've taken it away. All the pretty statuary, that was there, they took it away. But remaining are these lovely ladies who double as columns. They are armless. I don't know that they were always armless. Yes. I'm going to show you a close-up here in a minute. They are worn, your faces are worn off, but they're called caryatids. I don't know why I'm sure there is a reason. I'm sure caryatid means something in Greek that I don't know. But columns that are ladies are called caryatids. I think it's just awesome to have columns that are ladies. I think it's cool. So my whole life, I saw pictures of this place. I was like, oh, that's so awesome. And those caryatid ladies, they're so cool. I can't believe they're in such good shape after all these years. And then I got there, and I'm like, this is just awesome. And then the next day I went to the museum, and I made a life-changing discovery. These are not the real caryatids. These are reproductions that they put in there because they don't want the real ones to get any worse off than they already are. The real ones are in the museum, down at the bottom. I've been lied to all my life. I thought those were the real ladies. No, I'm glad they're in here. I'm glad they're not getting damaged. So you can see, no, they have no arms. But this one has hole where there should be an arm.
So what was that, the Barbie?
I don't know. Maybe, I mean, they did sometimes cast things, make things in pieces. These were bronze, obviously, to make in pieces. But these are the caryatids. They are safely in the Agro Museum. What? No. So, shock of my life. The real ladies are safe inside, and these ladies are just imposters. So this is one of, I'm going to say 3 or 4 building, one of them's not in very good shape, that are left on the Acropolis. Well, I have to find a picture. I have a book. I should bring it in. It has an artist's reconstruction of what the Acropolis would have looked like in its heyday during Pericles' time. It must have been gorgeous. Because remember, they painted these. The paint is all chipped off now, but Greek statues were painted bright colors. And when you walked up to the Acropolis, it was a riot of shape and color and beauty.
That's so weird. In fact, nowadays a lot of modern sculptures and stuff aren't.
Yeah.
They're one solid color.
And we kind of think of it, I mean, I picture something a little low class, you know, really, you're going to paint that? But they painted them. The frieze around the top of the temple, they painted. But the paint is gone from weather over time. So perhaps, I don't know when the ladies were removed and the other ones were put, maybe when the lid blew off the Parthenon. Somebody got the memo that maybe we should move some of this stuff indoors. Anyway, that's our first Acropolis building, built under the direction of Pericles in his massive reconstruction of Athens, and particularly the Acropolis, because he said, Acropolis is the center of the world. Athens is the center of the world, as far as he's concerned. And Acropolis is the center of Athens. And we have visitors from all over the world here. We want to look good. We want to look good. Ergo, we can take the money and we can use it as we see fit. So let's go ahead and get your questions out. I would like to work through the beginning here the best I can without my glasses. So sorry. And this was a lot of information. I'd like to point out to you what I think is important. Excuse me. In order, as far as I can. I'm so sorry. But the first question I asked you was, why did Thucydides write this history, and who is he writing it for? Yeah, Gabby. Well, he is writing for whoever's reading it. I mean, that's true. But who is he writing it for? Well, yes, but that's half the answer. That's half the answer. Yeah, what do you think?
He believes the Peloponnesian War is going to be a great war. So he's writing this work as, quote, a possession for all time.
Okay, so that kind of answers both. In the first paragraph, and I hope this is helpful, I put the paragraph next to your questions for most of these, I think. Please don't just go read that paragraph. That's cheaty. But it helps you know what I'm going for. He says, Thucydides, an Athenian, wrote the history of the war between the Peloponnesians and the Achaeans. The Athenians, see? Beginning at the point, man, I can't read. I just want to read what's there. We're going to start over. Thucydides, an Athenian, wrote the history of the war between the Peloponnesians and the Athenians, beginning at the moment that it broke out, and believing that it would be a great war and more worthy of relation than any that had preceded it. He says this belief was not without grounds. The preparations of both the combatants were in every department in the last state of perfection, and he could see that the Hellenic race was taking sides in the quarrel, those who delayed doing so at once having it in contemplation. Everybody's taking a side. All of Greece is going to be involved in this. And that doesn't count just Greece, that counts Macedonia and Thrace up to the north and Asia Minor. Now, this is a pretty bold statement because Herodotus has written a massive book, as you know, on the Persian War. And for him to say, this is going to be more worthy of relation than any that has preceded it. This is the main event. Let's revisit his statement later when we get done and decide how it compares, okay? Because we haven't read it yet. We can't really pass a judgment on that. What? Well, yeah, we will decide. Well, but we can't hold Thucydides responsible for anything that happened after he was dead. All right, so that's out.
I did, the Greeks did respect the Persians, without that war, the Persians would have been completely taken over.
This is true. All right, well, I will let you have an argument with Thucydides. This sounds like a paper topic coming on to me. That's not the paper topic I chose, but it'd be a good one. Okay, he also says in paragraph 22, and this is the second half of Gabby's, when you said for his readers. Yes, but who are his readers? He says, well, first of all, let me backtrack a little bit. My conclusions have cost me some labor. Oh, actually, I don't want to read that part. The absence of romance in my history will, I fear, detract somewhat from its interest. He does not mean love interests. He does not mean there aren't marriages in his history. By romance, he means fairy tale-ish stories of other places and other times. Gee, I wonder what historian is really fond of just like crazy stories about weird stuff. Herodotus, obviously. He's saying, that's not me. The lack of romance in my history may turn some people off, he says. But if it be judged useful by those inquirers who desire an exact knowledge of the past. So those are his specific readers, right? I'm not just getting a soda and sitting down and reading my summertime, Western or whatever, novel genre you like. I want exact knowledge of the past as an aid to the understanding of the future. Thucydides says, I'm going to show you what happened because things like this happen again and again and again because people don't really change. Which in the course of human things must resemble if it does not reflect it. I shall be content. In fine, I have written my work not as an essay which is to win the applause of the moment, but as a possession for all time. And here we are in a room, 2,500 years later almost, with his book sitting here in front of us. And you know what? As you go through this book, you're gonna see parallels. Things that happen, it's like, yeah, that's like this war and this war, because people don't change. We have great generals who have studied this book. I believe George S. Patton, famous World War II general, was a big fan of Thucydides. Because people make similar decisions in similar situations. He also said,
Population in one city.
oh, yes. He also says, you noticed probably as you read, Thucydides likes to put speeches in people's mouths. And often, and they're very great speeches. And often one person stands up, it's like a debate. One person, here's my position, boom, 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 here's my supporting reasons, and then rebuttal. They stand up, here, no, this is why this is wrong, this is why this is wrong. It's really, if you do debate or you want to study, persuasive writing, these are cool. But we might ask ourselves, wait a minute, Thucydides, how accurate are these speeches? I want to know, how do you know what they said? But he tells us. He says, with reference to the speeches in this history, some were delivered before the war began, others while it was going on. Some I heard myself. Remember, this guy was a general in the Athenian army. He was present at some of these. Others I got from various quarters. We can only trust that Thucydides' informants were people who knew what they were saying. Apparently Thucydides judged them worthy, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on page 15. I will try to remember to tell you guys. Just, you don't even have to raise your hand. Just say, where, and I will tell you where. Paragraph, maybe you can say it not more nicely than that. Not scream at me. Yes, Ethan. Well, a little bit, but we're going to see some ways that he differs. He says, it was in all cases difficult to carry them word for word in one's memory. Yes. So my habit has been, and this is his famous defense of what he's doing in this history, but people still debate what he means by this. My habit has been to make the speakers say what was in my opinion demanded of them by the various occasions, of course adhering as closely as possible to the general sense of what they really said. So he's saying, I'm going to make them say what should have been said, keeping in mind what also was really said, which I gathered from being there myself. And he says, no, I didn't memorize it word for word, but I remember. And people who informed me what was said. But what he means by, I have made them say what was demanded by the occasion, we don't know how much was embellished, yes.
It's a little bit making a good character while you're asking. If someone, I don't know, says something to you, then you would say something certain back. You wouldn't go and say something crazy.
Yes.
Like there is a response that everyone expects.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not necessarily, I wanted them to say this, so I'm going to just change it said that. But I know the circumstances, and I know the person, so what would they say in
Yes,
those circumstances?
exactly. And he knows the circumstances very well because he's an insider. So, go ahead.
Yeah, all of this is based on history, but some of it's made up. But, I'm not going to tell you which parts are made up.
Well, perhaps, but I think that we might be putting words in his mouth if we say he made, what do we mean by made up? It's Alex's distinction, but it's also his, when he said, I've already lost the page now, but when he said, adhering, of course, as closely as possible to what was actually said. If he's interviewing a source, and he's writing this history, and he says, well, the Corinthians got up in this assembly, and they said that they were going to, turn the Athenians' allies against them, and they were going to do this and that, and it wouldn't take them too long to build up a fleet. Okay, then Thucydides can run with that, right? He can say, okay, I'm going to take those points, those arguing points that they had, and then make them sound nice, and maybe flesh them out, like you do if you had a proof in a persuasive essay, when you have all your supporting reasons. So he starts out, interestingly, by not really talking about the war at all for several pages. This section, if you look at the footnote, it's known as the archaeology, and it is basically a history of Greece. How did Greece get to this point? How did Greece get so strong? And he points out a couple of things. He says, the first person known to us by tradition as having established a navy is Minos. This would be the fabled king of Crete. Minotaur. The Minotaur guy. He's not the, you know what I mean by the Minotaur guy. He made himself master of what is now called the Hellenic Sea, and ruled over the Cyclades, and into most of which he sent the first colonies. So my question for you is Thucydides already gone off the rails and turned into Herodotus? Why tell us? Why do we care where the first navy in Greece came from for this book? Okay, because the very first fight we're going to read about is a naval fight off the coast of Corcyra, and because envy of Athens' navy is part of the reason for the war, because this is going to be a naval operation against a naval power. Does it make sense? So it makes sense to bring it up. Then he brings up the Trojan War and Agamemnon. And he goes on to say, well, how would Agamemnon get so strong? How could he get all of these people to go with him to the Trojan War to attack Troy? And I'm sorry, if I had my glasses, I could do this better. He's been represented as consisting of 1,200 vessels. Now, it is in, no, I don't want to read that either. No, I'm sorry, I can't find the sentence I'm looking for, so I'm just going to paraphrase. He insinuates in this section on Agamemnon, the reason he got so much power was because of, the reason he had so much success was because of the people leagued with him. He managed to get a league of most of Greece to do what he wanted. Say that again. He managed to get a league of Greek cities to do what he wanted. Why is that significant for this book? Because Athens has a league and the Peloponnesians have a league. This war is a war, yes, between two cities, but it's really between two cities and all their dependents, all their allied cities. So he goes back to Thucydides and he says, here's where we first got a navy. Here's where we first leagued together and banded together. Then he mentions we also banded together to drive the Persians out. But this is what happens now. This is what happens when we band together into opposing camps, and each camp is jealous and suspicious of the other. So it makes sense for him to begin his book that way, even though I thought last week I told you this isn't like Herodotus, and then I started rereading this week. I thought, oh no, they're going to kill me. They're going to read this and say, but he's going back in time and he's going all over the place again. But after he gets started, he doesn't. So he starts out by saying, let me see if he has already said this. Okay, oh, thank you. Okay, I am trying to see, oh, yes. I'm going to be on page 16 in a minute, but first I'm going to go to my map. So there are three main areas of battle that you read about this week. The first one is in this island of Corcyra, or Corcyra. I'm going to call it Corcyra. Corcyra had been a colony of Corinth. Corinth had sent them out, but this was many years ago. All right? And then Corcyra, in turn, had sent out a colony up to the north called Epidamnus. And Epidamnus, the people there got to fighting with each other. And they threw some of them out. And the ones who got thrown out came to Corcyra and said, please help us, you're our mother country. And like, I don't know. So they're like, well, okay, great. We're just going to go to the CEO of the whole colony corporation, Corinth. Plus an oracle had told them, seek out your Dorian, or your Dorian mother, yeah. So they go to Corinth, and Corinth says, yes, I will help you. No, Corcyra is not real wild about it. We don't want Corinth messing around up here. We have our own business. Stay out of our business. So they welcome the exiles from Epidamnus. So Corinth comes. They're trying to keep the exiles out and help Epidamus keep its status quo. The exiles want back in, and Corcyra is helping them, and they butt heads. And Corinth comes, and they start threatening to attack Epidamus, and they start threatening Corcyra. What? Now, before this happened, before it came to blows this way, Corcyra had also gone to Corinth for help in dealing with Epidamus. I don't know what to do. Will you help us with these exiles? No, we won't. We won't help you. Corcyra says, great, then we're going to go to somebody who will. Athens, they want to help. Now, problem. There had been, and I asked you this question later, there had been skirmishes over things in that 50 years since the Persian War. Sparta doesn't like this Delian League one bit. And Athens thinks Sparta's just too big for their britches, and besides, they just stayed back in the Peloponnese. They wanted to cut and run and build a wall and save themselves when the Persians came. So they've been butting heads. Finally it was so frequent that they made a truce, a 30 years truce. And in this truce, I can't attack your allies and you can't attack my allies. And great. Corinth is in the Peloponnesian League. They're an ally of Sparta. Corcyra has just gone to Athens and said, will you help us when Corinth comes? I'm like, wonder if that is a breach of the treaty. Well, not really if we don't attack them. Because Corcyra is neutral. Corcyra is like Switzerland, all right? We're not in a league. So technically, there's nobody's ally, right? So you're not helping anybody's ally, because technically there are nobody's ally. So Athens says, okay, I think it's okay if we just line up our ships and say, you can't come here. You can go anywhere else, but we're going to stop you from coming here. We're not going to attack you, because that would be a breach of the treaty. But if you attack us, these people, it's Corcyra behind me, these people are our allies, and we will defend them, all right? So this is, I'm reading a great history book that I've never read. I'm reading Polybius's History of Rome. And he brings up these two ideas. The difference between the pretext for doing something and the cause of doing something. So for example, this would never happen in your house, I know, but let's pretend your sibling just annoys you. Let's just pretend, And your sibling just annoys you, and they just are getting worse and worse and worse. And so you notice that they have neglected to take out the garbage, and you feel duty-bound to point this out to your parents, just because. And your sibling gets angry with you. You're gonna tattle on me to mom, okay, and you have an argument. The pretext of the argument is you tattling about the trash, but the cause of the argument is the general unrest and annoyance that your sibling has been. Do you see the difference? The pretext is the thing that lights the match, but the cause is often something underlying. This would never happen in your home, I'm sure. So the pretext for hostilities breaking out again is the affair of Corcyra, all right? And you are stepping on our toes. Corinth is one of our allies. You're fighting Corinth. No, we're not. We're just protecting Corcyra. Okay, but the real reason, and this was the next question. How does Thucydides, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the next question. Skip down to the next one. What does Thucydides believe was the real cause of the war? Paragraph 23 on page 16. Yes, Matthew.
I don't have the paragraph, but Sparta's fear of the growing power that is Athens, especially their need.
Yes. I will quote him here in paragraph 23. The growth of the power of Athens and the alarm which this inspired in Sparta made war inevitable. It was just a matter of time. Corcyra just struck the match. I'm sorry, I skipped that one. And I guess I already answered it, really, didn't I? How does Thucydides describe the way that they spent their time in the between the Persian and Peloponnesian War? What did you write down there?
Quarreling and war.
Quarreling. Yes, I'm not even going to pick out. I gave you his paragraph 18. He just outlines much irritation with each other. That I'm not going to go into because I already described it. Okay, so the next, give me a moment to kind of go through. I left out something I really wanted to say yesterday because I didn't take the time to just browse through. On all my flags aren't in places that I want, so we already talked about that. So the Corcyraeans have come to Athens, and they are asking for help, and I am on page 21, okay? And there's a very long, several-page speech in which Corcyra explains to them why Athens should help them.
It seems like Corcyra is treating Corinth with resentment, and when it needs help, Corinth doesn't help. So it's like, how could you?
Yes.
We're part of you, even though
Yes.
you're jerks.
Yes.
So now they're going back.
There was obviously bad blood before between Corcyra and Corinth, because the Corinthians are there. So we have this double speech thing, okay, in Athens. The Corcyraeans are there and they give their say, and then the Corinthians stand up and they give their say. And the Corinthians say, they basically say, Corcyra, hey, you pretend to be neutral and you pretend to be an outsider. This is so you can get away with whatever you want. You've been getting away with whatever you want for years, and you treat us with no respect. You know, we don't send out colonies to be disrespected. We send out colonies to, get our props. You're supposed to give us allegiance, give us help when we ask it. Be nice. You don't know any of those things. But before they speak, the Athenians, or the Corcyraeans, make this argument. They say, I'm on the top of page 23. I'm actually starting at the bottom of page 22. If any of you imagine that the war is far off, he is grievously mistaken and is blind to the fact that the Spartans, out of fear of you, want war, and that Corinth is influential with them. The same, remember, that is your enemy, and is even now trying to subdue us as a preliminary to attacking you. Oh, we're just a station on the way, but the train is barreling through and you're the destination. They're coming for you next. You let us go, and they're coming for you next. They also have one more really great argument. Top page 24. There's a wide difference between declining the alliance of an inland and of a maritime power. For your first endeavor should be to prevent, if possible, the existence of any naval power except your own. Failing this, to secure the friendship of the strongest that does exist. Hey, newsflash, we're an island, says Corcyra. We have a navy. We've got good ships. And you know what? If Sparta takes us over, Sparta gets the ships. You get the ships if we make an alliance with you. They're going somewhere because we're not strong enough to keep them out without help. Do you want our ships? Do you want to listen to the enemy? And then, as I said, Corinth gets up and chews them out for being a bad colony, bad children, bad child, bad disrespectful child. I wish I had my glasses. Oh. and there's a seedy underbelly. And remember Euripides. These are the people who welcome Medea. These are the people, oh, aren't you happy to be in a Greece ruled by law and not the whim of the mighty? On the bottom of page 26, the Corinthians said, if you make it your policy to receive and assist all offenders, you will find that just as many of your dependencies will come over to us, and the principle that you establish will press less heavily on us than yourselves. Hey, you want to help our colonies? What happens when your allies start leaving you and come over to us? We're going to say, sure, you're setting a precedent here you don't want to set, Athens. You don't want to just receive anybody and give them help. Because your allies have already tried to leave, and you've squished them, and more are going to try to leave. Because you guys are oppressive. And when they do, we're going to welcome them with open arms and all their stuff with them to help the war effort. Watch your step, Athens. However, Athens decides, and I asked you, how was Athens drawn into war, and which side did it join, and why? Yeah, anybody but Matthew. No offense to Matthew, but go for it, Matthew.
The Corinthians and the Corcyrians came to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then why they joined Corcyria, their strategic position and navy would be valuable in the upcoming Peloponnesian War. It's only the technical one, so.
Yes. And here's the say. This is in paragraph 44 that I directed you to. It began now to be felt that the coming of the Peloponnesian War was only a question of time, and no one was willing to see a naval power of such magnitude as Corcyra sacrificed to Corinth. We can't lose their ships. Sparta is weak in ships. Sparta is not a naval power. You know, Athens is number one on the sea, and Sparta is number one on the land. I mean, Athens had good fighters, but you know, Sparta, they're Spartans, for crying out loud. They're the heroes of Thermopylae, and I mean, even though they lost, but you know, they're still heroically defending it. They take their little boys away when they're 7 years old and train them to be warriors. They're awesome. We need to play to our strengths, right? And our strength is on the sea, and the more boats, the better. We can't risk them getting those boats. So they vote for war. Wow, it would be so much easier if I had my glasses. It is. That's awful. Another thing happens. I'm sorry, I'm squinting and trying to see the plot, and I'm doing the best I can. So this is happening, and you know, it reminds me like the Boston Massacre. If you have two lines of enemies against each other, and there's a lot of hostility, it's kind of only a matter of time before somebody snaps and something happens. Somebody snaps and they throw a rock. Somebody snaps and they shoot a colonist. Somebody snaps and they charge one of the Corinthian boats even though it's supposed to be defensive. Do you know what I mean? It's only a matter of time. So the snap happens and they realize the treaty is out the window. Now I'm going to go through the formal vote for war. But before they'd even formally voted for war, they said, Sparta said, we got to counterattack. Something we can do about this. I know. Athens has a colony over here. This thing that looks like a paw print, I think it looks like a paw print sticking down. This claw is, at the top of it is a town called Potidea. This claw actually is a big mountain range. There's a big mountain called Mount Athos on the end, and it was the home in the Middle Ages and today of Orthodox monasteries. Just thousands of monks live on Mount Athos. But anyway, not them. Potidea, so the Peloponnesians come and they say, you know, Potidea, I bet you'd like to rebel. Wouldn't you just like to be your own boss? isn't Athens just, I don't want to obey them anymore. And they rebel from Athens with nudging, all right, heavy nudging from, so Athens goes up here and they besiege the city. And we have, and this is some of the stuff that it's sort of the secondary plot line of the book that you read. So they're conspiring with the king of Macedonia, trying to bring him in. And it's convenient because the king of Macedonia has been booted out and his brother's on the throne. And I'm going to help you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You come in and help me with Potidaea, I'll get you back on the throne. There's all this intriguing going on, okay? But the main thing is, they're ours and we're not letting them go. And the Peloponnesians said, oh yes, you are, and this is just a foretaste of what's going to happen when this all breaks loose. Your allies are going to come over to us, whether they want to or not, in some cases. Mostly, they wanted to, because the tribute was becoming oppressive, the amount of tribute they had to give. Okay, so we have Corcyra, Potidaea, both sides of Greece were fighting, and then, well, let me see if I want to read this. Okay. Yeah, and this is on the bottom of page 37. Thucydides sums all this up, everything I've said, with this. The Athenians and the Peloponnesians had these antecedent grounds of complaint against each other. The complaint of Corinth was that her colony, Corinth? Potidaea was a Corinthian colony? I got that all wrong. No, I could have sworn that she was an Athenian colony. Well, I'll read. Thucydides knows more than me. The complaint of Corinth was that her colony of Potidaea and Corinthian and Peloponnesian citizens within it was being besieged. Okay, I'm sorry, I totally botched that. That of Athens against the Peloponnesians, that they had incited one of their cities in the alliance and liable for tribute to revolt.
What I heard was
Wait a minute.
What I heard was that the city, Potidaea,
Had
was governed by the Athens, but was filled with a bunch of...
Yes, this is what has happened, because they're worried about the Corinthian and Peloponnesian citizens within it. The Athenians complain that the Peloponnesians have incited one of the cities in their alliance and liable for tribute to revolt, and that they had come and were openly fighting against her on the side of the Potidaeans. Yes, so it's both. It's not either or. It's both and. They are an Athenian colony. Athens is besieging them to take it over, but the Corinthians have come in and incited them to revolt and put their own citizens in there. And now Athens is besieging them, and they're saying, wait a minute, Potidaea isn't yours anymore. She's come over to us. How dare you besiege our city? Because now she's revolted from you. She's our city. I'm not crazy. Then, so there's not formal war yet. You might say, it sounds like war to me. People are dying, people are killing, yes, but they haven't formally declared war. It's the problem. Athens has a council, but Pericles is in charge, and all their ruling decisions are made in Athens. The allies, we're not going to poll the allies and see what they want to do. It doesn't work that way. Athens will say jump, and the allies will say how high. That's how it's going to work. The Peloponnesian League was, honest to goodness, a league. It was a group of equals banded together for a certain cause. They couldn't really take any action until they invited them all together and took a vote. Does that make sense? Which makes it a lot harder to get things done. Obviously, if you've got to call an embassy from Thebes and, and Argos and all these other places, and you have to say, well, do you think we should vote for war? Yes. One ruler can get things done a lot faster than a group of people. But when you have a group of people, more people get their say. You lose one and you gain something else. So I want everyone, if you've got your book, turn to page 39. They have an assembly in Sparta, and Sparta is already leaning towards war. They did have one a king or general, Archidamus, I can't remember which one, and he told them, you know, you want to think about this. Athens is strong and they rule the sea. This is going to be tough. I know we're good fighters, but they have resources just beyond our imagining because they have all these allies. You think about it. But he doesn't say maybe we shouldn't go to war. He said, let's just send embassies back and forth for a year or two and arbitrate while we get ready for war, which is a little sneaky. Let's just take some time. Let's tell them, let's submit this to a neutral party for arbitration, but really we're making weapons and stuff. They shot him down. Like, no, we're not waiting 2 years. But now we have to gather them together. The Corinthians show up, and this is what's happening on the pages I had you turn to. The Corinthians are telling the Spartans why they, and the whole league, why there needs to be war. And I want to read the paragraph that starts, most of the paragraph that starts on the top of page 39. Remember, Corinth is talking to Sparta. For all this, you are responsible. You it was who first allowed them to fortify their city after the Persian War, and afterwards to erect the long walls. You who, then and now, are always depriving of freedom, not only those whom they have enslaved, but also those who have as yet been your allies. For the true author of the subjugation of a people is not so much the immediate agent as the power which permits it, having means to prevent it, particularly if that power aspires to the glory of being the liberator of all Hellas. Now, I'm going to repeat that last part. The true author of the subjugation of a people is not so much the immediate agent, not the one who actually does it, as the power which permits it, having the means to prevent it, particularly if that power aspires to the glory of being the liberator of Hellas. This week, we are going to do one of our short responses, as close to 300 words as Hannah can get it. And I just want you to critique this. Who is responsible? Who is more responsible for an evil? The one who does it or the one who could have stopped it and didn't? Because they were lazy, because they were self-absorbed. And this evil doesn't have to be war, and it doesn't have to be Greece, okay? But think about what the Corinthians are saying. All this is your fault. They're oppressing people, but you could have stopped them and you didn't do it. Yes. Okay, so I would like you to tell me if you agree with that statement. Is the person who allows it to happen at least equally responsible with the person who does it? And it can be whatever. You know, your mom says, don't touch those cookies, and you could stop your brother or sister from doing it and you don't. Don't use that example because it's really, really trivial. Do you know what I mean? But that's the idea. Who's the bad guy? The perpetrator or the one who sits by and just lets it happen? I want you to say, yeah. Or can you think another, this could be anything you want it to be. Do you think that's true? Or do you think it's not true? Are there examples, other examples you can think of in history? Or in stories? It can be fiction, it can be a movie, anything, where somebody lets something bad happen. And they could have stopped it, but they didn't. Does that make sense to everybody? Because it's kind of important, I feel like. We walk around all the time, and it's easy to see bad things and just say, but that doesn't affect me. But that's not my problem, and just let it happen. Is that okay? Yeah.
So we're supposed to use like an example?
Yeah, it can be, I'm sorry, this is a very open-ended assignment. So it could be just critiquing whether or not you think that's true. And you can give reasons why you think it's true or not. You can include examples, You could pattern it after another example. If you can think of a large example of this from a book or a movie or something you're familiar with, just show me, you can tell me about the example and say how it proves this is true or this isn't true. Does that make sense? Anything related to this topic is acceptable, all right? There's not, it has to have these 3 points, or just, I want to hear your reflections on, do we blame people who just let bad things happen and don't do anything about it? Yes, sir. This is the 250 to 300 words. Basically, a good-sized paragraph. I just want to hear what you think. Because we do it all the time. I mean, I shouldn't say we, I do it all the time. I mean, I just look the other way when somebody's begging on the street or homeless or what, you know what I mean? And I know I didn't put him there, but I let this person continue in that state. Do you know what I mean? How much at fault am I? When our country goes bad because we have bad leaders and we just don't say anything about it, are we guilty if we just sit back and take it? I mean, I have no answers to this. I'm just curious. I read this and it was just stunning to me. Like, seriously, are you saying that if you just sit back and do nothing, you're as guilty? That's what the Corinthians are saying. Sparta, you're more guilty than Athens. So, and you could also critique that. More guilty? Equally guilty? Less guilty? Does everybody understand what I mean? Okay. Then there's a long section. Oh, this is the thing I forgot to mention yesterday. The Corinthians, this is page 40, have a very long section comparing Athens to Sparta. And they say this: the Athenians are addicted to innovation, and their designs, I've lost my place, and their designs are characterized by swiftness alike in conception and execution. You have a genius for keeping what you have got, accompanied by a total want of invention, and when forced to act, you never go far enough. Again, they're adventurous beyond their power, and daring beyond their judgment. In danger, they are sanguine. Your want is to attempt less than is justified by your power, to mistrust even what is sanctioned by your judgment, and to fancy that from danger there is no release. There is promptitude on their side, against procrastination on yours. They are never at home. You are most disinclined to leave it, for they hope by their absence to extend their acquisitions. You fear by your advance to endanger what you have left behind. They are swift to follow up a success and slow to recoil from a reverse. Their bodies they spend ungrudgingly in their country's cause. Their intellect they jealously husband to be employed in her service. A scheme unexecuted is with them a positive loss. A successful enterprise, a comparative failure. This is one long antithesis. You're scared, they're daring. You're overly conservative, they're very audacious to go out and acquire new. You got to understand who you're fighting against. And Corinth's point is, wake up. Wake up to who your opponent is. There's the weirdest noises happening today, aren't there? It's a little distracting. It's getting really good. Athens gets up. The Athenians happen to be in Sparta. They have an embassy there. And they said, can we say a few words? And on page 43, they said, and this is section 2, sentence 2, in paragraph 76. It follows that it was not a very remarkable action, or contrary to the common practice of mankind, if we did accept an empire that was offered to us, and refused to give it up under the pressure of 3 of the strongest motives: fear, honor, and interest. And it was not we who set the example, for it has always been the law that the weaker should be subject to the stronger. You know, we have an empire. Yeah, we did it out of fear. First of all, fear of the Persians. But second of all, you know, the proverbial, I have a tiger by the tail and you don't quite know how to let go. If we let go of the Allies, what are they going to band together and do something in retaliation? We got them in subjection and now we got to keep them there. Honor and interest. It's in our interest to have all these people, and it does us honor. And he says, well, did you not get the memo that everybody acts this way? These are the motives of everyone. Oh, Jason says to Medea, aren't you glad you came to Greece, where we are ruled by justice and the rule of law? And no. Fear, honor, and interest. That's what drives human beings. And we got it, and we're not letting go of it. I want to point out that at the very moment that this is happening, Socrates is walking around the streets of Athens talking to people. It's happening at the same time. What is true? What is good? What is justice? He's asking those questions. No. Well, and then they didn't this, but they didn't give him the swig. Okay, then the rest of this book, most of the rest of the book one is the backstory of the growth of Athens' power. I'm going to skip over it. Much of this you read in Plutarch's Themistocles, right? The story of Themistocles building it up. So let's just move on to book 2. And the first question I asked you is, what is the general atmosphere in Greece at the beginning of the war? Oh, yes, Alex. Yes, that they really, really think this is really happening.
So it's not just hostilities anymore. It's an actual, you're on that side of the killing.
Yes. Yes. You want to add, Matthew?
The men, especially the young men, are really excited for the war, and most of those young ones are really hard.
Yeah. This is on page 93, particularly. It says basically it's they were full of young men whose inexperience made them eager to take up arms. This is the story of every war, isn't it? The young, inexperienced, like it's going to be awesome. I'm thinking of the American Civil War, both sides. Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to go out with my friends, we're going to camp, I'm going to shoot guns, I'm going to eat over campfires, go like one long camping trip with the guys. And guns. And guns! And then it doesn't turn out to be that way. It never turns out to be that way. Everybody was really excited. Now, the next question, what happened? So Pericles stood up, and this is a really good, no, we haven't got there yet. Pericles says on page 98, here's my battle plan. They were to prepare for the war, carry in their property from the country. They were not to go out to battle, but to come into the city and guard it, and get ready their fleet in which their real strength lay. He says, you know what's going to happen? The Spartans are going to come through that isthmus, and they're going to ravage our land. And they're going to burn your houses, and they're going to burn your crops. But don't be alarmed, because your real strength and power is in the sea. The Persians did it, and they didn't stamp us out. We don't want to meet these guys on land. They're really good. But we can wear them out. We can stay inside these walls indefinitely. Heck, we built those walls down to our harbor. We can ship stuff in. They can't stop us. We're really good at sea. We got walls protecting the several miles between the harbor and Athens. They can't stop us. So just sit tight and don't worry. But what happened to the attitude of the people when that happened? Yeah, Matthew.
They turned against him and forgot to pass the Pretext.
Yes. Bottom of page 103. In short, the whole city was in a most excited state. Pericles was the object of general indignation. His previous counsels were totally forgotten. He was abused for not leading out the army which he commanded, and was made responsible for the whole public suffering. It's all your fault, Pericles. Now, it did not help that plague broke out. I think I mentioned this last week. Largely, and this is I guess my question, how did his advice contribute to the plague? I feel like this is pretty obvious health advice.
He put the entire population to the transit.
Yeah, we're all crowded in, and so if something virulent starts, everybody's going to get it. And then we have Thucydides, no social distancing whatsoever. We have his account of what the plague did. Actually, let's look at that. That's the third question. What effect did the plague have on the morality of Athens? Yeah.
Men did as they pleased without a care for the days to come.
Yeah. Thucydides, I'm not going to, because of time constraints, I'm not going to read, and you read it anyway, his whole blow-by-blow account of this illness that was being passed around. It wasn't bubonic plague. They didn't grow the black, whatever, in their armpits. But he describes it in very detailed terms because he says he had it. He had it and survived. It didn't kill everyone who had it, but it killed excessive numbers of people who had it, much more than common illnesses. And so in the footnote in this edition, it says nobody really knows what this illness is. People have studied, because he's pretty specific about the progress and the phases of this illness, and apparently nobody has figured out what this illness is that they got. But Matthew is exactly right. It says on page 121, on paragraph, I'm squinting, 53, perseverance in what men called honor was popular with none. It was so uncertain whether they would be spared to obtain the object. But it was settled that present enjoyment and all that contributed to it was both honorable and useful. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. This is, when you get to that point, morale is pretty low. When you get to the point where a normally law-abiding citizenry just throws caution to the winds and just lives like there's no tomorrow because there may be no tomorrow for you, that's not good for morale. And of course, they blame Pericles. He dies in the second year. He dies of the plague. And I'm afraid I won't find the spot because I'm squinting so much. Thucydides talks about his death from the plague. Here, maybe it's in this section. Because I wrote a little note to myself in the, I can't find it. Thucydides makes a comment that Pericles, wait a minute, maybe I did ask you a question about this. Before I paraphrase it, let me read it. Oh, yeah. I did ask you a question. Let me just skip to that. It's paragraph 65. Which is on page 127. This is a sentence that starts number 6. He outlived its commencement, the war's commencement, 2 years and 6 months. And the correctness of his foresight concerning the war became better known after his death. He told them to wait quietly, to pay attention to their marine, to attempt no new conquests, to expose the city to no hazards during the war, and doing this promised them a favorable result. What they did was the very contrary, allowing private ambitions and private interests in matters apparently quite foreign to the war to lead them into projects unjust both to themselves and their allies, projects whose success would only conduce to the honor and advantage of private persons, and whose failure entailed certain disaster on the country and the war. The causes of this are not too far to seek. Pericles, indeed, by his rank, ability, and known integrity, was enabled to exercise an independent control over the multitude. In short, to lead them instead of being led by them. And I'm skipping down to the very last sentence that starts on that page. In short, what was nominally a democracy was becoming in his hands a government by the first citizen. With his successors, it was different. More on a level with one another, and each grasping its supremacy, they ended by committing even the conduct of state affairs to the whims of the multitude. This is a really good summary of the rest of this book that you're going to read. In particular, I think it's books 5 and 6 or 6 and 7. You're going to read about a harebrained scheme to conquer Sicily. Stupidest idea. But the guy who wanted to do it, he was young and good looking and very charismatic and very into himself and his own honor. Like, yeah, let's do that. No! Pericles said no. Do you not remember Pericles? No, we don't remember Pericles. Well, there were reasons. We'll get into the reasons later. Okay, I actually kind of answered the next to last question. Why did Athens ultimately lose the war? They didn't listen to Pericles. And they let a bunch of second-rate politicians dictate their policy with disaster as a result. Okay, last question on this page 81. Pericles' funeral oration. This long speech that Pericles makes, and it begins on page 111. Apparently it was the custom in Athens, whenever they were at war, that those who fell in the early battles of the war in the first year, they had a public funeral. So they made a magnificent tomb for them, and they had a public figure give a speech in praise of them. There were religious rites involved and sacrifices. And so they chose Pericles to give the speech, because he's Pericles. And he makes a speech that goes on for several pages in your book. And I asked you, what does he praise more than the soldiers? He spends a lot of time praising something, but it's not the soldiers. Let Lauren do it. Yes. Athens in general, but yes, Athens. Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, I'll say it's Athens democracy.
Yes. He says, our Constitution does not copy the laws of neighboring states. We are rather a pattern to others than imitators ourselves. Its administration favors the many instead of the few. That is why it is called a democracy. If we look to the laws, they afford equal justice to all in their private differences. If to social standing, advancement in public life falls to reputation for capacity, class considerations not being allowed to interfere with merit. You want to get to the top in Athens, every boy can grow up and be archon in Athens. Yes, I phrase it that way on purpose. Yes, we don't care if you come from a poor background. We don't care if your family is sketchy. If you can do it, we're in. That's the kind of men that rise to power in Athens. What? But yes, because the guy who's going to say, yay, rah, let's go to Sicily, very sketchy. He says, further, we provide plenty of means for the mind to refresh itself from business. We celebrate games and sacrifices all year round, and the elegance of our private establishment forms a daily source of pleasure and helps to distract us from what causes us distress. While the magnitude of our city draws the produce of the world into our harbor, so that to the Athenian, the fruits of other countries are as familiar as a familiar a luxury as those of his own. We are surrounded by beauty and magnificence. Yeah, we built it with money from the treasury, but we are surrounded. We are a great city. He says, we throw open our city to the world and never by alien acts exclude foreigners from any opportunity of learning or observing. This was true. Sparta, do you remember, Plutarch tells us Sparta's like, no, we don't want visitors. You'll bring in your ideas, your money, and your luxury, and your ideas. We don't want your kind here. Athens like, come. You can't just become a citizen and vote in the council. You can live here and teach and learn and study. Yes, come, see who we are and be like us. Yeah, you going to say something? Yeah, and eat that black broth. No. So how does he comfort the families of the dead? Because when we presume in a funeral oration, there ought to be a little bit of that. What did you find, Matthew?
Them by saying the soldiers who died for glorious cause, preferring death over dishonor, so that their deeds will last forever. And he comforts the widows, saying that great glory, and that the children will brought up by his thanks.
Yes. They are the glory of Athens. This Athens that I've just spent multiple pages telling you about, that's what they died for. And he says this beautiful thing at the bottom of page 115. For heroes have the whole earth for their tomb. I'm starting at very bottom where it says 3, sentence 3. For heroes have the whole earth for their tomb, and in lands far from their own, where the column with its epitaph declares it, there is enshrined in every breast a record unwritten with no monument to preserve it, except that of the heart. We're building them a beautiful tomb, but they don't need it. They're inscribed on our hearts. But then Pericles died. This is the man who, if he had lived, one can only wonder what would the course of the war had been, but he didn't live. The final question I asked you, as we're getting close to the end, before we answer that, let me just browse really fast. I see I have one more flag. I just want to, let me throw this in, and then we'll finish up. We mentioned at the beginning of class Thucydides' attitude towards including speeches in his history, and on what grounds he chooses things. So we know a little bit of his philosophy of history from that, and from the fact that he's hoping this will be influential for the future. These things happen again. They've happened in the past and they will happen in the future, and if we learn from the mistakes, perhaps the course of countries will be different than the course of our country. So we know a little bit about this. He also said, I'm not writing a romance like Herodotus, although he did not name Herodotus, but we're pretty sure he's talking about Herodotus. I am not going to fill it full of foofy stories about babies abandoned at birth and, raised like Cyrus, there's another one of these babies abandoned at birth and people, and people hiding behind doorways to see the king's wife naked, and then she comes back and says, kill. Okay, I'm not doing any of that, he says. Unless a story is really, really important to the plot, I'm not telling you. So we know his attitude towards that. Then we hear another, we kind of have to read between the lines, but do you remember that Herodotus was very, very, I don't know if quick to believe is the right term, but he gave some level of credence to prophecies and oracles and omens. All right, I don't know I can't even think of a specific example offhand, but he mentioned it a lot. And there was a prophecy, and the oracle said, Croesus, he based the whole thing on the fact that the oracle said, if you attack the Persians, a great kingdom will fall. So he has a lot of that sort of thing in his book. Well, you know what? It's easy for us in our cozy lives. It's hard for Croesus when you really, really want to do something. Yes. Okay. So it's like, oh, never mind. I'm thinking of a crazy story myself. Like I'm turning into Herodotus. So he says this on page 121. Such was the nature of the calamity. He's talking about the plague. And heavily did it weigh on the Athenians, death raging within the city and devastation without. Among other things which they remembered in their distress was, very naturally, the following verse, which the old men had long ago been, which old men said had long ago been uttered. And the verse was, a Dorian war shall come, and with it pestilence. The Dorians are the Peloponnesians. So a dispute arose as to whether dearth and not death had been the word in the verse, that famine will come, not death. Did it say? Dearth means a lack of something. And apparently our footnote says that this is, the Greek words are linos, famine, and loinos, pestilence. In the Greek, they're very, very close. So whether it meant pestilence or whether it meant famine or lack. So dearth means a lack. I'm sorry. So dispute arose as to whether dearth and not death had been the word in the verse. But at the present juncture, it was of course decided in favor of the latter, for the people made their recollection fit in with their sufferings. I suppose, however, that if another Dorian war should ever afterwards come upon us, and a famine should happen to accompany it, the verse will probably be read accordingly. How does Thucydides feel about prophecies? Yeah, like you just translate it to make it fit your circumstances. If we had another one, you're going to say, oh, I think he meant, and famine will come because now we're having a famine. You have to read between the lines. He's not going to come right out and say, it's a lot of hocus pocus hooey. But he insinuates, yeah, they made it fit with what was happening. I suppose if it happened again, they made it fit the other way. So the last question, and I will just do a quick, so the last area where something happened was Naupactus. This is at the entrance to this gulf that comes in to Corinth. You guys can't see it all, can you? If I move to the other side, can you see? Then he can't see. I feel bad when I'm just standing in front of it. So the Corinth is here. They would like to go in and out. Athens stations both here because they would like them to not go in and out. This makes sense. So, and we really would like to not fight in the close area if we're Athens because we're awesome on boats. We just twist and turn, we can row our boats around and ram you. We're awesome. The Spartans are kind of slow and they're learning the whole Navy thing. But if we can lure them out in the open and fight them, it'd be awesome. So one day, at Naupactus, this town, the Athens has a fleet there. And they line up and there's the Peloponnesian fleet. I'm like, oh, come out on the ocean and fight us. And the other side's, come on, Athens, come into the narrow place where we have a fighting chance. They're waiting, and finally the wind changes, and also the Peloponnesian fleet starts threatening a nearby town, and Athens says, okay, we got to go for it. We got to go into the bay, and let's just, fingers crossed. It didn't go well for them. They got in so close to the shore that some of them ran aground on the shallows, some of them got rammed. And I asked you though, something happened in this naval battle at Naupactus that changed the tide of the battle. And it's kind of funny. You want to tell the story, Matthew?
I think I got this correct, but one of the Athenian Kyries boats turned around and sank a merchant ship that was there. Like, that wasn't even like that was a rough battle, which caused a panic among the one of their own.
Yeah. Yes.
No one also says that they didn't actually sink it because of how the ship.
Yes. And you notice they're always sinking and then towing them away. And they towed away the ships. They sank the ships. The ships would break apart and then they would take on water, but they were made so that they would just kind of float below the surface and they could tow them and then repair them and take their ships. So you're really close. So the merchant ship, this is a ship, it's not the Eye of Sauron, it is a ship, it was there. And so, I'm the Athenian ship and I'm the Peloponnesian ship, and the Athenian ship was running for it. They hadn't been captured yet, and they're running for it. And they actually ran around the merchantmen and they smacked the Peloponnesian ship. And all the other Peloponnesian, crews had thought it was over. And they just dropped their oars and like, yeah, we showed them, and wait, he's sinking. Oh my gosh, and they just had a meltdown. They just had a complete meltdown because this one ship was willing. Like, we got nothing to lose. We can double, because we're good navigators. We're good maneuverers on land. And they just took out one ship. And the Peloponnesians just lose it. We're all gonna die. And they run away. And it turns the tide of the battle. One ship turned the tide of the battle. I love this. I don't think so. Let's make sure I'm telling the story right, since Matthew and I have different versions. Yeah, well, which makes me like, buddy, bring your stuff another day. This is not a good time. Okay, let me find it. Just a second.
Battles are scheduled. We have a battle on Wednesday and Friday.
Hang on, I gotta find it.
Starts up on Tuesday. We're all fighting starting.
Hang on. Yeah, I'm on 147. Okay. Okay, with the exception, these with the exception of one ship, all outsailed them and got safe to Naupactus. After a while, the Peloponnesians came up chanting the paean for their victory. I'm on sentence 2 down there. And the paean is like a chant. We're on page 147, paragraph 91, sentence 2. After a while, the Peloponnesians came up chanting the paean for their victory as they sailed on. The single Athenian ship remaining being chased by a Leucadian, who is one of the Peloponnesian allies, far ahead of the rest. But there happened to be a merchantman lying at anchor in the roadstead, which the Athenian ship found time to sail round, and struck the Leucadian in chase amidships and sank her. An exploit so sudden and unexpected produced a panic among the Peloponnesians. And having fallen out of order in the excitement of victory, some of them dropped their oars and stopped their way in order to let the main body come up. An unsafe thing to do, considering how near they were to the enemy's prows. Elated at this incident, the Athenians at one word gave a cheer and dashed at the enemy, who, embarrassed by his mistakes and the disorder in which he found himself, only stood for an instant and then fled. One entity can change the course of a battle. One quick decision. You are one little entity, but you can change the course. So dash around that merchantman and smash that Leucadian ship. And when this is going to actually be useful in your life.
Do they have metal bows or something? Because, war on wood doesn't seem to be a good.
I do not know. I don't think so. I think the Romans did something like that, but I don't think the Greeks did. So I would like you to read books. I'm sorry I kept you 5 minutes late. I would like you to read books 3 and 4 and write that response and tell me if you think someone who lets something bad happen is equally or more responsible to this person who actually perpetrates the bad thing. And have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for putting up with my squinting.